slow down. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go, and nothing you need to solve. Just get comfortable, close your eyes, and listen. In this Come lecture, we will gently explore the ancient world of Egypt, a civilization of warm deserts, wide rivers, quiet temples, and endless stars. Ancient Egypt existed for thousands of years. It was already old when many other civilizations were still young. And even today, it feels mysterious, like a distant dream. If you ever feel your thoughts drifting away, that is perfectly fine. You don't need to remember every detail. You can simply listen and let the story carry you into sleep. Let us begin with the land itself. Egypt was shaped by one powerful force, the Nile River. The Nile was not just a river, it was the heart of the country, the reason life could exist in such a dry place. Each year, the Nile would flood, and when the water slowly went down, it left behind rich dark soil, perfect for farming. To the ancient Egyptians, this yearly flood felt like a miracle. It meant food, it meant safety, it meant that the world was still in balance. Outside the Nile Valley, the desert stretched endlessly, golden sand, dry winds, silence. The desert was dangerous, but it was also protective. It acted like a natural wall, keeping enemies away, and because of this, Egypt could grow peacefully for long periods of time. The Egyptians saw their world as a place of order, surrounded by chaos. They even had a word for this sacred balance. They called it Ma'at. Ma'at meant harmony, truth, and the natural order of the universe. They believed that the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, had one main duty: to protect Ma'at, to keep the world stable, and to keep the gods satisfied. The Pharaoh was not seen as an ordinary person. He was believed to be chosen by the gods, and sometimes even considered partly divine. To obey the Pharaoh was to obey the cosmic order itself, and so Egypt became a land of great building projects, long traditions, and deep spiritual beliefs. But before we speak of pyramids and temples, we should imagine daily life. Most Egyptians were farmers. They lived in small villages near the river. They woke up early, worked in the fields, and depended on the Nile. They grew wheat, barley, onions, garlic, and flax. They made bread, they brewed beer, and they lived simple lives. The sun was hot, the air was dry, and at night the desert sky became dark and endless. The stars above Egypt must have been breathtaking. For ancient people, the night sky was not just beautiful. It was a message, a map of gods and stories and hidden meanings. And this is where the Egyptian imagination truly comes alive, because Egypt was not just a place of farms and rivers. It was a place of sacred animals, mysterious rituals, and powerful myths. The Egyptians believed that the world was filled with invisible forces, that spirits lived in nature, that the gods watched everything, and that death was not the end. To them, death was simply another doorway, a quiet journey into a different world, and so they prepared for it. They built tombs, they wrote spells, they created art, and they tried to make sure that the soul would be safe. Tonight, we will explore this world slowly, calmly, like walking through an ancient temple corridor lit by soft torchlight. And as you listen, you may begin to feel sleep coming closer. That is exactly what this lecture is for. Now, let us take a gentle step back in time to the earliest beginnings of Egypt. Now, let us travel further back to a time before pyramids, before great kings, before the settled near the water because it gave them life. They fished, they hunted, they grew crops, and slowly learned how to survive in harmony with the land. Over time, these villages became towns, and these towns became small kingdoms. At first, Egypt was not one united country. It was divided into two main regions. The first was Upper Egypt, and the second was Lower Egypt. This may sound confusing, because Upper Egypt was actually in the south, and Lower Egypt was in the north. But the reason is simple. Upper Egypt was higher in elevation and closer to the source of the Nile. Lower Egypt was where the river spread outward and formed a wide green delta near the Mediterranean Sea. Upper Egypt was long and narrow, surrounded by cliffs and desert. Lower Egypt was wide and fertile, filled with wetlands, reeds, and rich farmland. For many years, these two regions developed separately. They had their own leaders, their own symbols, and their own traditions. Upper Egypt was often represented by a white crown. Lower Egypt was represented by a red crown, and eventually a powerful ruler united them. According to tradition, this ruler was called Narmer. Some people also know him by the name Menes. He is often described as the first pharaoh of a united Egypt. When Upper and Lower Egypt became one, a new era began. The pharaoh wore a combined crown, showing that he ruled both lands, and Egypt became one of the most stable and long-lasting civilizations in human history. This stability was not an accident. The Nile provided regular harvests, the deserts provided natural protection, and the Egyptians created a strong system of government, religion, and culture. They kept records, they built cities, they organized workers, and they developed writing. Their writing system is famous even today. We call it hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs were more than just letters. They were pictures, symbols, small works of art. Some hieroglyphs represented sounds, like an alphabet. Others represented objects, ideas, or even entire words. To write was considered sacred, because writing could preserve truth. It could preserve power. It could preserve memory. The people who could read and write were called scribes. Scribes were extremely important in Egyptian society. They recorded taxes, counted crops, wrote laws, and kept history. In a way, scribes were the quiet architects of the civilization. Without them, Egypt could not function. Now, imagine the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt. The days were shaped by sunlight. People rose early, when the air was cooler. They worked until midday, when the heat became heavy. Then they rested, and later, when the sun lowered, they continued. This slow rhythm, this natural routine, created a peaceful way of living. And the Egyptians were not only practical, they were deeply spiritual. They believed the world was filled with gods, not distant gods, but gods connected to nature. The sun, the river, the sky, animals, even the wind. One of the most important gods was Ra, the sun god. Ra was believed to travel across the sky each day in a great solar boat. In the morning, Ra was born. At midday, he was powerful, and in the evening, he grew old and descended into the underworld. During the night, Ra traveled through darkness, fighting chaos and preparing to rise again. This story reflected the Egyptian view of life itself, a cycle, birth, death, and rebirth. Every sunrise was proof that the world was still alive, and because of this belief, the Egyptians respected the sun deeply. They built temples, they performed rituals, and they created myths that explain the mystery of existence. But sun. Another powerful figure was Osiris. Osiris was the god of the afterlife and the judge of the dead. He was also connected to agriculture and the fertility of the land. His story is one of the most famous in Egyptian mythology, and it is also one of the most peaceful when told slowly. Osiris was said to be a good king, a wise ruler, but he was betrayed by his brother Set. Set represented chaos, storms, and disorder. He was jealous and violent. According to legend, Set trapped Osiris and killed him, but the story does not end there. Osiris's wife, Isis, was a powerful goddess. She searched for him across Egypt. She gathered the pieces of his body and used magic to restore him, and through her devotion, Osiris returned, not to rule the living world, but to become the ruler of the underworld. This myth was deeply meaningful to the Egyptians. It showed that death was not a final ending. It was a transformation, a passage into another state of being, and it gave people hope. It told them that life could continue beyond the visible world. The Egyptians believed that the soul had many parts. One part was called the Ka. The Ka was like a life force, or spiritual energy. Another part was called the Ba. The Ba was like personality, or individuality, and they believed that after death, these parts needed protection. They needed a home. This is why tombs were built. This is why bodies were preserved, because the physical body was connected to the spiritual journey. And so, mummification became a sacred tradition. The Egyptians believed that if the body remained intact, the soul could recognize it, and the person could live again in the afterlife. This may sound strange today, but to them, it was logical. It was careful preparation, like packing for a long trip, and in a way, the Egyptians were always preparing for the flood, preparing for a harvest, preparing for the gods, preparing for eternity. Now, as you listen to these calm ancient stories, you may feel your thoughts slowing down, your breathing becoming softer, your body becoming heavier. That is good. That is natural, because Egypt, with its quiet deserts, slow river, and timeless temples, was a world built for silence. And in the next part, we will begin to speak about the pyramids and why they were built. Now, let us speak about one of the most famous symbols of ancient Egypt, the pyramids. Even today, thousands of years later, they still stand, silent, massive, and almost unreal. When people first see the pyramids in person, they often feel something unusual, a strange mix of awe and quietness, because the pyramids are not just buildings. They feel like monuments to time itself. But why were they built? And how did the ancient Egyptians create something so enormous without modern machines? To understand the pyramids, we must first understand how the Egyptians viewed the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was not simply a king. He was the center of the entire civilization. The Egyptians believed that the Pharaoh connected the human world with the world of the gods. His role was sacred, and when a Pharaoh died, it was not only a personal death, it was an event that affected the entire cosmic balance. The Pharaoh's spirit had to travel safely into the afterlife, and if that journey was successful, Egypt would remain protected, the gods would remain satisfied, and the Nile would continue to flood, just as it always had. So, the tomb of a pharaoh was not only a grave, it was a spiritual machine, a carefully designed structure, built to help the pharaoh reach eternity. sloping sides. Inside, deep underground, there was a burial chamber. These early tombs were made of mud brick, but over time Egypt became wealthier and pharaohs became more ambitious. One of the first great transformations came during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. Djoser lived during the Third Dynasty, around 4,600 years ago. His architect was a brilliant man named Imhotep. Imhotep was not only an architect, he was also a healer, a priest, and a scholar. He is one of the earliest known geniuses in human history. Imhotep designed something new. Instead of building one flat mastaba, he stacked several mastabas on top of each other, and the result was the first pyramid. It was called the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid of Saqqara still exists today. It looks like a staircase rising into the sky, and in a way, that is exactly what it was meant to be, a staircase for the pharaoh's soul, a path upward toward the heavens. After the Step Pyramid, the idea continued to evolve. Later, pharaohs wanted something even more perfect, something smoother, something more symmetrical, and eventually, the Egyptians created what we now imagine when we hear the word pyramid, a smooth-sided triangle of stone. The most famous pyramids were built at Giza, near modern Cairo. They were built during the Fourth Dynasty. The largest one is called the Great Pyramid. It was built for Pharaoh Khufu. The Great Pyramid is one of the most astonishing structures ever created by human beings. For centuries, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. It was built using millions of stone blocks. Some of these blocks weigh several tons, and even today, experts still debate exactly how the Egyptians moved them. But what we do know is this: the pyramids were not built by slaves. For a long time, people imagined slaves working under the hot sun. But modern archaeology suggests a different story. Many workers were skilled laborers, farmers who worked on the pyramids during seasons when the Nile flooded, and farming was impossible. They lived in organized camps. They had food, they had medical care, and they were proud to work on a sacred project. To build a pyramid was not simply construction. It was service to the pharaoh, service to the gods, and service to the future. The pyramid itself was part of a larger complex. There were temples nearby. There were causeways. There were smaller pyramids. And there were tombs for nobles and officials. Everything was arranged with purpose, with symmetry, with spiritual meaning. The shape of the pyramid was deeply symbolic. It may have represented the rays of the sun, a way for the pharaoh's soul to climb upward, like light rising into the sky. The pyramid may also have represented the first mound of earth that rose from the waters at the beginning of creation. In Egyptian mythology, the world began as endless water, and from that water the first land emerged. The pyramid, rising from the desert, may have been a reminder of this sacred beginning. And at the very top of the pyramid, there was often a special stone called the pyramidion. It may have been covered in polished limestone, or even gold. Imagine how it must have looked. A shining tip, catching the sunlight, glowing above the desert, like a star, like a symbol of immortality. The Great Pyramid was once covered entirely in smooth white limestone. When it was new, it would have looked brilliant, almost like a mountain of light. But over time, much of the limestone was removed and reused in other buildings, and what remains today is the inner structure, the rough stones beneath, still powerful, still silent, still standing. Inside the Great Pyramid there are narrow passages, there are chambers, and there is mystery. The most famous chamber is called the King's Chamber. It contains a stone sarcophagus, simple, heavy, and empty. There is also another chamber, often called the Queen's Chamber, and there are long, narrow shafts pointing toward the sky. Some believe these shafts were meant to guide the soul, to connect the Pharaoh to certain stars, because the Egyptians believed that the Pharaoh could become one with the heavens. Some believed he could join the stars that never set, the eternal stars, the ones that circle the sky each night. And so, the pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a bridge between worlds, a place where stone, geometry, and faith became one. And as you imagine these quiet chambers, these dark corridors, and the desert outside, you may begin to understand why Egypt feels so timeless, because it was built with eternity in mind. Now, in the next part, we will explore the daily life of Egyptians, their homes, their food, their work, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary people living beneath the shadow of the pyramids. Now, let us leave the pyramids for a moment and imagine something quieter, not the world of kings and monuments, but the world of ordinary people, because most Egyptians did not live in palaces. They lived in small homes, made of mud brick. Mud brick was easy to create. The Nile provided mud, the sun provided heat, and the bricks dried naturally, becoming strong enough to build walls. Most houses were simple. They had small rooms, flat roofs, and very little furniture. Life was not filled with luxury, but it was filled with routine, and routine can be comforting. In the early morning, people woke up with the sun. They stepped outside into warm air and began their work. The farmers went to the fields. The craftsmen went to workshops. The fishermen went to the river. Children helped their families, or played in the dust near the village. Egyptian villages were often surrounded by fields. You could see green crops stretching toward the horizon, with the desert always nearby, a quiet reminder that water was precious. Most Egyptians ate simple food. Bread was the center of their diet. They made it from wheat or barley, and they baked it in clay ovens. They also drank beer, but Egyptian beer was not like modern beer. It was thicker, almost like a drinkable bread. It provided energy and nutrition, and it was safer than drinking untreated water. They also ate vegetables, onions, garlic, lentils, and sometimes fruit. Dates were popular, figs, pomegranates, and grapes. Meat was more rare. Ordinary families did not eat meat every day, but they could eat fish, and sometimes birds from the river. Wealthy Egyptians ate better. They had more variety, more spices, more wine, and they could afford more meat. But even the rich lived in a world without modern comfort. No electricity, no machines, only firelight, only sun, only wind. In the evenings, families would gather. They would talk, they would eat, they would rest, and the night would slowly cover the land. Imagine an Egyptian night, the air becoming cooler, the river flowing quietly, the sky filled with stars. It must have felt peaceful, but also mysterious, because the Egyptians believed the night was alive. They believed the gods moved through darkness. They believed spirits traveled, and they believed the sun itself went on a journey beneath the earth. This is why they respected night, and why they respected sleep, because sleep was like a small journey, a small death, a temporary separation of the soul. The Egyptians believed dreams were meaningful. They believed dreams could be messages from the gods. Some people even went to temples, hoping to sleep there and receive a sacred dream, a dream that could guide them, or warn them, or heal them. Aye, let us imagine the streets of an Egyptian town. You would hear footsteps in the sand. You would smell bread baking. You would see donkeys carrying baskets. You would see merchants selling pottery, or linen, or tools made of copper. You might see a scribe walking calmly, holding papyrus, and you might see priests wearing white linen, moving toward a temple. Temples were not only places of worship, they were centers of power. They stored food, they stored wealth, they employed workers, and they controlled land. In a way, temples were like small cities. Inside the temples, rituals happened every day. The priests believed the gods needed care. They washed statues. They offered food. They burned incense. They spoke sacred words, and the temple remained quiet, cool, and filled with shadows. Most people did not enter the deepest parts of the temple. Those areas were reserved for priests, but ordinary Egyptians still respected the temples. They brought offerings. They prayed outside. They asked for protection, health, and good harvests, because life was fragile. A flood could fail, a sickness could spread, and the desert was always waiting beyond the green land. And yet the Egyptians continued. They worked, they built, they believed, they lived in harmony with their world. And this harmony, this steady rhythm, is one of the reasons Egypt lasted so long. Now, as your mind becomes slower and your breathing becomes calmer, you can imagine the quiet life along the Nile, a peaceful river moving slowly beneath a sky of stars. And in the next part, we will explore the Egyptian belief in the afterlife, the rituals, the Book of the Dead, and the strange, beautiful idea that a person could live forever if they followed the right path. Temples were some of the most important places in ancient Egypt. They were not only religious buildings, they were centers of power, centers of wealth, and centers of daily ritual. When we imagine an Egyptian temple, we often think of tourists walking between tall stone columns. But in ancient times, temples were not public spaces in the way we imagine today. Most people never entered the inner parts. The deepest rooms were reserved for priests, because the Egyptians believed that a temple was not simply a place to pray. A temple was the home of a god. Inside, the god was present, not as a human figure, but as a sacred force, and the statue of the god was treated like a living being. The priests did not see themselves as performers. They saw themselves as caretakers. Every morning, the temple rituals began quietly. The priests would wash. They would dress in clean linen. They would purify themselves with water, because cleanliness was connected to holiness. Then they would enter the inner sanctuary. This was the most sacred part of the temple. Dark, cool, silent, a place where the outside world disappeared. Inside the sanctuary, the statue of the god was kept. The priests believed the god needed attention, like a king, like a living ruler. So they would perform the daily routine. They would open the shrine. They would speak sacred words. They would offer incense. They would wash the statue. They would dress it in fine cloth. They would offer food, bread, fruit, wine, meat, and after the ritual, the food would often be taken away and shared among the priests. But in Egyptian belief, the god had already essence of the offering, the physical food, remained, but the divine part was consumed. This was not seen as superstition. It was seen as balance, a relationship between humans and the gods. The temple was a place of rhythm, the same rituals repeated every day, the same words, the same gestures, the same incense smoke rising into the air. It was like an endless routine, designed to keep the universe stable, because the Egyptians believed that if the gods were neglected, chaos could return, the flood might fail, the harvest might disappear, disease could spread, the desert could swallow the land. So the priests performed their work with seriousness, not with fear, but with discipline. Some temples were dedicated to Ra, the sun god. Others were dedicated to Amun. Amun became one of the most powerful gods in Egyptian history, especially in the city of Thebes. Amun was often combined with Ra, and became Amun-Ra, a god of hidden power and sunlight, and the temple of Amun at Karnak became one of the largest religious complexes ever built. Karnak was not built in a single generation. It grew over centuries. Pharaoh after Pharaoh added new courtyards, new columns, new statues, new walls. Walking through Karnak today feels like walking through a stone forest. Tall pillars rise like trees. Shadows move across the ground, and even though it is silent, it feels alive. Temples were also places of learning. Scribes worked there. Records were kept. Texts were copied. Knowledge was stored. In many ways, temples were libraries. They preserved not only religion, but history, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and myth. The priests were not only religious figures, they were also scientists of their time. They studied the sky. They tracked the stars. They watched the moon. They observed the flooding of the Nile. They learned patterns, and those patterns helped Egypt survive. The Egyptian calendar was closely connected to the stars. One of the most important stars was Sirius. The Egyptians noticed that Sirius appeared in the sky around the same time each year, just before the Nile began to flood. This made Sirius a sacred sign, a signal of renewal, a promise that life would return again. The temple world was calm, but it was also political, because temples controlled land, they controlled workers, they controlled resources, and sometimes priests became extremely powerful. In certain periods of Egyptian history, the priests of Amun became so rich that they almost ruled like kings themselves. This created tension, because the pharaoh was supposed to be the center of power, but the temples held enormous influence, and yet, despite politics, the daily ritual continued. Quietly, patiently, day after day, the priests lit incense, they whispered prayers, they walked through cool corridors, and outside, the Nile continued to flow. This is one of the most peaceful images of ancient Egypt, a civilization that believed the world could be maintained through calm repetition, through routine, through sacred care. And as you listen, you may feel that same calm rhythm, like a slow heartbeat, like gentle waves. In the next part, we will explore Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. The Egyptians did not see death as the end. They saw it as a transition, a doorway, a quiet journey into another world. To them, the afterlife was not a vague idea. It was detailed, structured, and filled with spiritual geography. They believed the soul would travel through a hidden realm, sometimes called the Duat. The Duat was the underworld, a place of darkness, but also a place of transformation. It was not only frightening, it was mysterious, and it was filled with challenges. The Egyptians believed that after death, the soul would face tests, not physical tests, but spiritual ones. The soul had to prove that it was worthy of eternal peace, and one of the most important moments in this journey was the judgment of the dead. In Egyptian belief, the soul would appear before Osiris. Osiris sat on a throne in the underworld, calm, silent, and eternal. Around him were other gods, sacred witnesses, and the soul would be asked to speak, to declare innocence. The Egyptians believed the soul had to say something called the negative confession. This was a list of statements, not exactly prayers, but calm declarations. The soul would say, "I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not lied. I have not caused suffering. I have not polluted the river." It was a quiet moment of truth, a moment where the soul looked back at its life and tried to show it had lived in harmony. Then, the most famous ritual would happen, the weighing of the heart. The Egyptians believed that the heart was the center of a person, not the brain. The heart held memory, emotion, character, truth. So in the afterlife, the heart would be placed on a scale. On the other side of the scale was a feather, the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of balance and harmony. If the heart was light, if it was not heavy with wrongdoing, then the scale would balance, and the soul could continue. The soul would be allowed to enter paradise, a peaceful land, often described as the field of reeds. It was like an ideal version of Egypt, a place with green fields, fresh water, and gentle sunlight, a place where the soul could live forever, without hunger, without fear, without pain. But if the heart was heavy, if it was filled with chaos, the scale would tip, and then the soul would face destruction. Not eternal torture, but something worse, total disappearance. The Egyptians feared this more than anything. They feared being erased, forgotten, destroyed. This is why they cared so much about living according to Ma'at, because Ma'at was not only for life, it was for eternity, and standing near the scale was a strange creature, a creature called Ammit. Ammit was part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. She was called the Devourer. If a heart was judged unworthy, Ammit would consume it, and the soul would vanish. This image may sound frightening, but to the Egyptians it was simply justice, a natural consequence, balance restored, and beside the scale stood another god, Anubis, the god of mummification. Anubis was often shown with the head of a jackal. He guided souls, he protected tombs, and he watched the weighing carefully. Another god, Thoth, recorded the result. Thoth was the god of wisdom and writing. He wrote down the judgment, as if the universe itself required documentation. Everything in Egypt was recorded, even the fate of a soul. The Egyptians also believed that words had power, spoken words, written words, sacred names, spells. They believed that language could shape reality, and this is why they created funerary texts, texts meant to protect the dead, to guide them, to give them instructions. One of the most famous collections of these writings is known today as the Book of the Dead, but the Egyptians did not call it that. They called it something closer to spells for going forth by day, meaning spells that allowed the soul to move freely, to leave the tomb, to travel, and to return safely. These spells were written on papyrus, placed inside tombs, sometimes written on the walls, sometimes written on coffins. They were like a spiritual map, a guidebook for eternity, and the Egyptians believed that if the proper spells were known, the soul could avoid danger, it could open gates, it could speak the names of guardians, it could pass safely through darkness. This belief created a culture obsessed with preparation, not preparation for war, but preparation for death, because death was seen as a journey, and a journey required planning. The tomb was filled with objects, food, furniture, jewelry, tools, even small statues of workers. These statues were called ushapti. They were meant to serve the dead person in the afterlife, so the soul would not have to work. Even in eternity, Egyptians wanted comfort. They wanted peace. They wanted the afterlife to feel like home. And so they built homes for the dead. They painted walls with scenes of gardens, rivers, harvests, and family gatherings. They filled tombs with beauty, because beauty was protection. Beauty was order. Beauty was a sign of harmony. Many tombs were designed like small worlds. Inside, everything was carefully arranged. There were offerings of food. There were jars of oil. There were fine linens. There were perfumes. There were sacred symbols. And there were written prayers. The Egyptians believed that the tomb was not simply a resting place. It was a gateway, a doorway between the living world and the eternal world, and the body itself was treated with great care. This brings us to one of the most famous traditions of Egypt, mummification. Mummification was not done because Egyptians loved death. It was done because they loved continuity. They believed that the soul needed a recognizable home, a place to return to, a place to rest, so they preserved the body. They removed organs. They dried the body with salt. They wrapped it in linen, and they placed amulets between the layers, small sacred objects, symbols of protection. One of the most common amulets was the scarab. The scarab beetle was a symbol of rebirth, because scarabs were seen pushing balls of dung across the ground, and the Egyptians imagined them as tiny creatures shaping the world. They connected the scarab to the rising sun, to renewal, to the idea that life always returns. Another important amulet was the Eye of Horus, a symbol of healing and safety. Horus was a powerful god, often shown as a falcon. He represented kingship and protection. The Eye of Horus was believed to guard the soul from harm. To the Egyptians, these symbols were not decoration. They were real spiritual tools. The mummy was placed in a coffin, and that coffin was placed in another coffin, sometimes even several layers, like a set of protective shells. The final resting place might be a stone sarcophagus, heavy, solid, almost impossible to move, and the tomb was sealed. But the story did not end there. Families continued to visit tombs. They brought offerings. They spoke prayers. They asked their ancestors for guidance, because in Egyptian belief, the dead were not far away. They were present, invisible, but connected, and there is something deeply human about this idea, the wish to remain connected, the wish that loved ones are still near, the wish that death is not a final separation. In a quiet way, ancient Egypt was a civilization built on hope, not loud hope, not dramatic hope, but steady hope, the hope that life continues, the hope that order can be maintained, the hope that the universe is not random. And this belief gave them strength. It gave them patience. It gave them the ability to build monuments that still exist today. Now, if you imagine an Egyptian tomb, you can almost feel the atmosphere. A cool stone chamber, paintings on the walls, a faint smell of incense, a sealed doorway, and outside the desert wind moving slowly across the sand. The world of Egypt was filled with silence, and in that silence, the Egyptians believed eternity could be found. In the next part, we will explore some of the most famous Egyptian gods, and why animals played such an important role in their religion. Because in Egypt, even animals were sacred. Even the smallest creature could carry divine meaning. Ancient Egypt was a civilization built on silence, on slow rivers, warm sand, and endless sky. It was a world where people looked at the sun and saw something sacred, a world where they looked at the stars and felt that the universe had meaning. The Egyptians lived close to nature. They respected the Nile. They respected the desert. They respected the rhythm of time. And even though their world was difficult, they created something lasting, something almost eternal. They built pyramids that still stand. They carved temples from stone. They wrote symbols that survived thousands of years. But perhaps the most powerful thing they created was not a building. It was an idea. The idea that life has order, that harmony matters, that the soul is not lost, that death is not simply an ending, but a transition, a quiet doorway. In many ways, Egypt was a civilization of calm. They believed in Ma'at, balance, truth, peace, and they tried to live with that balance in mind. They tried to keep the world stable, to keep the gods satisfied, to keep the river flowing, to keep the future safe. And when we study Egypt today, we are not only studying the past, we are also looking at the human desire to create meaning, to create beauty, to create permanence, and to feel safe under the sky. So tonight, as you rest, you can imagine the Nile flowing slowly through the darkness. You can imagine the desert, quiet and endless. You can imagine temples in the distance, lit by moonlight, standing silently beneath the stars. And you can imagine the calm life of people long ago, falling asleep in small villages, listening to the wind, and trusting that the sun would rise again, because it always did, and it still does. Thank you for listening, and if you are still awake, you can simply continue resting. There is nothing else you need to do. Just breathe slowly and let your thoughts fade like footsteps in the sand. You are doing well. There's nothing you need to think about right now. Nothing you need to solve. Nothing you need to plan. Just let your body rest. Let your shoulders relax. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands feel heavy. If you are still awake, that is completely fine. There is no rush. Sleep comes naturally when the mind stops fighting. So you can simply listen. And if your thoughts drift, you can gently let them go, like clouds moving across a quiet night sky. Take a slow breath in, and slowly breathe out. And again, breathe in, and breathe out. Feel the air moving calmly through your body. Feel your chest rise and fall. Each breath makes you a little calmer. Each breath makes you a little heavier. Your eyes can rest. Your face can soften. Your forehead can relax. You do not need to focus on every word. You can simply hear the sound of the voice and let it carry you. Imagine that you are safe. You are warm. You are comfortable. The room around you is quiet. The air is gentle, and everything is peaceful. Your thoughts can slow down. Your mind can become still, just like the Nile at night, moving slowly, smoothly, silently through the darkness. If you notice any tension in your body, you can let it melt away. Your neck relaxes. Your shoulders relax. Your arms relax. Your fingers relax. Your legs relax. Your feet relax. And the weight of your body sinks gently into the bed. You are supported. You are safe. You are resting. There is nothing you need to do. You have done enough for today. You can allow yourself to let go. Allow yourself to drift. You can imagine soft darkness, a calm sky, a slow river, a quiet desert, a gentle breeze. You can imagine ancient Egypt sleeping beneath the stars, the temples silent, the pyramids standing quietly, the villages resting, the world calm and still. And you can feel yourself becoming calm and still as well. Your breathing is slow. Your heartbeat is steady. Everything is quiet. If a thought appears, you do not need to follow it. You can let it pass. You can let it fade, like a whisper in the distance, like a small wave disappearing into the river. You are here, in the present moment, and the present moment is peaceful. The night is peaceful. Your body is peaceful. Your mind is becoming peaceful. You can imagine a warm light, not bright, just soft, like candlelight, like moonlight, like a gentle glow in the distance. This light is calm. This light is safe, and it surrounds you, slowly, quietly, like a blanket. You can allow yourself to relax even deeper. Let your breathing become slower. Let your muscles become softer. Let your thoughts become quieter. And if you feel yourself drifting, you can drift. There's no need to stay awake. You can let go. You can rest. You can sleep. You can simply disappear into calmness, into silence, into comfort. Your body knows how to sleep. Your mind knows how to sleep. You do not need to force anything. Sleep will come on its own, naturally, softly, like the night arriving over the desert, like the stars appearing one by one. And as you listen, you may begin to feel distant, as if the voice is far away, as if you are floating, as if you are gently drifting into a dream. That is good. That is exactly what should happen. Let yourself drift. Let yourself sink. Let yourself rest. You are safe. You are calm. You are comfortable. Everything is quiet. Everything is gentle. Everything is slow. Take one more slow breath in and slowly breathe out. And again, breathe in and breathe out. With every breath, you become heavier. With every breath, you become calmer. With every breath, you move closer to sleep. Your eyelids feel heavy. Your thoughts feel slow. Your body feels warm. Your mind feels quiet. And you can simply rest. If you are already asleep, that is perfect. If you are still awake, that is also perfect, because you are resting. And rest is enough. You do not need to think about tomorrow. Tomorrow will come when it comes. For now, there is only the night. Only silence. Only calm breathing. Only softness. Only peace. And you can stay here, in this peaceful moment. Let the world fade away. Let the noise fade away. Let everything become quiet. Your mind can drift into darkness. Your body can sink into sleep. Slowly, softly, peacefully, comfortably. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready for sleep. Good night. Good night. Good night. If you're enjoying this calm lecture and you'd like to support this channel, you can join me on Patreon. There you'll find longer, ad-free sleep lectures and exclusive episodes. Your support helps me create better videos with more history and more peace. Thank you, and sweet dreams. Just listen. Just stay. Just breathe. Because the more you listen, the more your body relaxes. And the more your body relaxes, the quieter your mind becomes. So, take a slow breath in and slowly breathe out. That's good. And again, slowly in, slowly out. Good. Now, let your shoulders drop just a little. Let your arms feel heavy. Let your hands feel warm. Let your fingers relax. And if your eyes are open, they can stay open. And if your eyes want to close, you can let them close. No effort, no pressure, just softness, just calm, just quiet. You don't have to think about tomorrow. Not now. You don't have to think about your problems. Not now. Tonight, you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to let go. And if your mind keeps talking, that's okay. Let it talk and let it fade. Let it become quieter and slower, like a radio, slowly turning down, lower and lower, until it becomes almost nothing. Just silence, just warmth, just darkness. Now imagine you are standing in a peaceful place, a warm night, a soft wind, the sound of water, very far away, a quiet river, and you are walking slowly, very slowly, and every step makes you calmer, every step makes you heavier, every step makes you sleepier, slow, calm, soft, and you can feel your body sinking